Imagine a quiet morning in 1902. Sunlight filters through a studio window, illuminating a painter's canvas. On it, a mother gazes softly, serenely at her young son, who rests in her tender embrace. A picture of idyllic domesticity, captured forever in oil and pigment. It's a scene countless artists have depicted throughout history, the profound, unconditional love between a mother and her child. This particular portrait, created over a century ago, seems to fit perfectly into that comforting narrative. It's elegant, timeless, and initially utterly unremarkable in its charming portrayal of maternal affection. But what if the most ordinary things conceal the most extraordinary and often unsettling truths? What if beneath the veneer of serene normalcy, a chilling secret lies hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered by those with eyes keen enough to truly see? This 1902 portrait, initially perceived as nothing more than a beautiful relic of a bygone era, held such a secret. It looked entirely ordinary until they saw how the mother held her son. At first glance, it is truly a magnificent piece of art for its period. The meticulous brushwork, the soft, muted color palette, the delicate rendering of light and shadow, all speak to the artist's skill and the prevailing aesthetic sensibilities of the early 20th century. The mother, dressed in a fashionable high-necked gown, possesses a gentle, almost melancholic beauty. Her hair is neatly coiffed, her expression thoughtful, perhaps even a little pensive. Her son, a small cherubic figure, appears to be contentedly nestled against her. His eyes, dark and wide, seem to look out at the viewer with an innocent curiosity that tugs at the heartstrings. The backdrop is simple, perhaps a draped curtain or a plain wall, ensuring that all focus remains on the two central figures and their intimate connection. Everything about the composition, the pose, the expressions conveys a sense of quiet dignity and familial warmth that would have been highly valued in 1902 society. It is the kind of painting you might walk past in a museum, admire for a moment, and then move on, perhaps thinking, how sweet, or what a lovely portrayal of motherhood. It feels deeply personal, yet universally understood. The historical context of such portraits often adds layers of meaning. In an era before widespread photography, painted portraits were not just decorative items, they were precious records immortalizing loved ones, signifying status, and preserving legacies. Families commissioned them to capture milestone moments or simply to celebrate their bonds. This particular portrait would have been a significant investment for the family depicted, a statement of their place in the world and their devotion to one another. Looking at it, one can almost hear the rustle of their clothes, imagine the quiet conversation that might have transpired in the studio, and feel the weight of time and history pressing gently upon the canvas. It's a window into a past that seems both distant and intimately familiar, a snapshot of life over a century ago, frozen in amber. The initial perception of this artwork, therefore, was entirely in line with its contemporaries, a charming, well-executed, utterly conventional depiction of a mother and her beloved child. Yet, as with many secrets, the initial hint of something amiss was not loud or dramatic. It was a whisper, a flicker at the edge of perception. It began not with an obvious flaw, but with a subtle, almost indescribable oddity in the mother's posture, specifically in the way she held her son. When viewing the portrait casually, your brain readily accepts the image as a standard maternal embrace. It fits the mental template for mother holding child. But if you linger for just a moment longer, if you allow your gaze to settle on the interaction between their two bodies, a tiny discordant note might register. It's not an error in anatomy that jumps out, nor a bizarre expression. Rather, it's a feeling, a faint, almost imperceptible sense that something is just off. The mother's arms, while clearly wrapped around the child, don't quite convey the expected warmth or security. The child, while nestled, doesn't quite seem to be held in a natural, yielding way. It's like a word on the tip of your tongue, a half-remembered tune. You know something is there, but you can't quite grasp it. This subtle dissonance is precisely what makes this portrait so captivating, so chilling, and so utterly unique. It challenges the viewer to look beyond the surface, to question the immediate assumption of innocence and tenderness that such a scene typically evokes. What precisely is it that makes this seemingly perfect embrace not so perfect after all? Prepare to embark on a journey that will forever change the way you look at historical art and the hidden stories they tell. If you're as fascinated by these extraordinary historical mysteries and unexpected discoveries as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community of curious minds who love to uncover the secrets buried beneath layers of time. You won't want to miss what we uncover next about this haunting portrait. The initial placid assessment of the 1902 portrait, once a consensus among casual observers, began to unravel under the scrutiny of more discerning eyes. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic revelation, but rather a slow, methodical chipping away at the veneer of normalcy. Art historians accustomed to dissecting brushstrokes and discerning intent were the first to feel a subtle discordance. Their deeper examination of the piece commenced almost imperceptibly, spurred by an indefinable nagging sensation that something was ever so slightly off. They approached the painting with their usual meticulousness, cataloging the muted tones, the exquisite detail of the lace collar, the soft play of light on the child's hair. Yet, as their gaze lingered on the central figures, the mother and her son, a quiet question started to form. It centered not on the obvious beauty, but on the very essence of the connection depicted. The ordinary perception of a loving, maternal embrace, so readily accepted at first glance, was slowly and deliberately being challenged. Experts, whose careers were built on understanding the nuances of human representation in art, started to notice subtle incongruities. The way the child's small body was held against the mother's side didn't quite align with the natural physics of a comfortably cradled infant. It wasn't overtly wrong, not a glaring anatomical error that would immediately jump out, but rather a stiffness, an almost formal arrangement that felt less like a tender embrace and more like a pose held with considerable effort. The child's weight, or rather the lack of its apparent distribution, became a point of quiet discussion. Was the artist simply struggling with perspective, or was there something else at play? Early theories emerged, attempts to rationalize this growing unease. Perhaps it was a stylistic choice, a peculiarity of the artist's hand, or a common convention of the period that we, with modern eyes, no longer readily understand. Some suggested anatomical inaccuracies. Portraiture, especially in the early 20th century, wasn't always perfectly true to life, often sacrificing realism for idealized forms. Others posited that it was simply a compositional decision, placing the figures in a visually pleasing, if somewhat unnatural, arrangement for the sake of the overall aesthetic. These initial hypotheses, however, quickly proved insufficient. They didn't quite capture the deeper, almost visceral sense of discomfort that was beginning to permeate the analysis. The more they looked, the more the conventional explanations seemed to fall short. The subtle details, initially dismissed as minor curiosities, began to accumulate, forming a quiet chorus of dissent against the painting's perceived innocence. The angle of the mother's wrist, the tension in her fingers, the very slight tilt of the child's head, which seemed less like innocent rest and more like a deliberate positioning. Each element chipped away at the assumption of a natural, spontaneous moment. The unsettling feeling, at first a mere whisper of doubt, grew steadily into a palpable presence. It wasn't the kind of unease born from overt macabre imagery, but rather the more insidious kind that arises when something that should be natural, something as fundamental as a mother holding her child, feels profoundly artificial. This wasn't just about an artistic quirk. It was about the very nature of human interaction being subtly yet powerfully reinterpreted within the confines of the canvas. The experts found themselves caught in a slow-motion unraveling, where every detailed examination brought them closer to an unexpected and potentially disturbing truth hidden beneath the layers of oil and varnish. The painting? which had once silently affirmed a universal bond, was now beginning to whisper secrets, hinting at a reality far more complex and perhaps tragic than anyone initially dared to imagine. The initial disquietude, a mere ripple in the calm surface of appreciation, truly began to swell as eyes trained themselves specifically on the mother's embrace. It wasn't just a general sense of something being off. It narrowed down, like a detective's lens, to the very mechanics of how she held her child. At first glance, a protective hold, perhaps even a tender one, but upon closer inspection, a subtle stiffness permeated her arms. Her hands, instead of cradling or warmly enclosing the child, seemed to support him with a certain detachment, almost like props. There was a rigidity in their placement, a lack of the natural elasticity one would expect from a mother's touch, especially in a moment captured for eternity on canvas. One might describe it as functional rather than affectionate, an act of holding rather than embracing. This peculiar stiffness in the mother's limbs inevitably cast a strange light on the child's posture. He was nestled against her, yes, but not quite with her. His small body, seemingly propped there, lacked the relaxed comfort usually seen in children held close by their mothers. There was an unnatural straightness in his spine, a slight lean that suggested he wasn't fully resting into her embrace. His head, too, seemed to be held in a precise, almost posed position, rather than gently reposing on her shoulder or chest. His small hands, instead of instinctively grasping at her clothing or reaching out, lay still, almost inert, on his lap or by his sides. It was as if he were a beautifully crafted doll, carefully positioned, rather than a living, breathing child yielding to his mother's warmth. The connection visually felt one-sided, a tableau rather than an interaction. The mother's gaze, while directed towards the viewer with an almost melancholic resignation, did not offer the reassuring connection one might expect when holding such a young being. To truly grasp the distinctiveness of this particular portrait and the unsettling nature of its embrace, it helps to compare it to other contemporary depictions of mothers and children from the same period. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were rich with genre paintings and portraits idealizing motherhood. Think of the soft, flowing lines, the gentle tilt of a mother's head, the way her hand gracefully curves around her child's back, pulling them intimately close. In countless examples, the children are often depicted with a sense of security, their bodies relaxed, their expressions reflecting contentment or innocent curiosity. Their arms might be wrapped around their mother's neck, or their heads nestled deeply into the curve of her shoulder. The fabric of their clothing often creases naturally from the pressure of the embrace, and the mother's fingers are frequently splayed, showing the gentle pressure of her hold. These were images designed to convey warmth, protection, and an unbreakable bond. They were visual poems of maternal love. But when placed alongside such conventional masterpieces, our 1902 portrait stood starkly apart. The mother's embrace here lacked the intuitive flow, the spontaneous grace. Her arms formed almost geometric angles, her hands less yielding and more rigid in their support. The child's posture, rather than mirroring the relaxed security of typical portrait subjects, maintained that peculiar, almost unsettling stiffness. There was no visible strain, no struggle, but crucially, no visible comfort either. It was an embrace that seemed to fulfill a requirement rather than expressing an emotion. The visual language was not one of warmth and intimate connection, but of careful arrangement, almost a display. This contrast only served to amplify the growing sense of unease that had begun to permeate the observation. The more one looked, the more the ordinary facade of the portrait began to crack, revealing something far more complex and frankly disturbing beneath the surface. This escalating disquiet was not merely an aesthetic judgment. It was an intuitive response to a perceived emotional dissonance. The very nature of the embrace, meant to symbolize unconditional love and protection, was instead hinting at something else entirely. The subtle incongruities in the mother's grip and the child's seemingly passive stance were no longer dismissible as artistic license or stylistic quirks. They were becoming too pronounced, too consistent in their deviation from the norm. The initial impression of a quaint historical piece was steadily dissolving, replaced by a nagging suspicion that a profound and unsettling truth lay hidden within the brushstrokes waiting to be fully deciphered. The illusion of normalcy, so carefully constructed by the painter, was beginning to crumble under the weight of detailed scrutiny. The portrait, once a simple window into the past, was now transforming into a perplexing riddle, its gentle surface belying a deeper, potentially tragic narrative. The next step would be to pinpoint the exact detail that shattered the illusion entirely, that single element that would irrevocably alter the interpretation of this seemingly innocent family portrayal. The critical observation, the detail that shattered the illusion entirely, came not from a sweeping assessment but from a meticulous focus on the mother's left hand, the one cradling the infant's head. For weeks, art historians and conservators had pored over high-resolution scans, comparing anatomical accuracy with artistic convention. They had discussed posture, balance, the fall of fabric, and the direction of gazes. Each element had been scrutinized, debated, and often dismissed as either stylistic or a slight artistic imperfection common in period pieces. The overall impression remained unsettling, but elusive, a feeling rather than a concrete anomaly. Then one quiet afternoon, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a specialist in early 20th century portraiture, noticed it. Her gaze had been drawn to the mother's thumb, barely visible, seemingly supporting the child's delicate temple. It was positioned in a way that, while seemingly supportive, also appeared oddly rigid, almost as if it were performing a duty rather than instinctively embracing. She zoomed in further, pushing the digital image to its absolute limit, revealing brushstroke by painstaking brushstroke. What she saw sent a shiver down her spine. The thumb, rather than gently curving to meet the contour of the child's head, was unnaturally straight, almost stiff. More critically, the angle of the thumb relative to the rest of the hand suggested a peculiar tension, an almost mechanical extension. It wasn't the soft, yielding curve of a living hand adapting to a delicate skull. It was flat, unyielding, and disturbingly fixed. Then her eyes drifted slightly lower to where the mother's index and middle fingers met the child's cheek. Here, too, the expected gentle indentation of flesh against flesh was missing. Instead, the child's cheek appeared almost untouched, supported not by the gentle pressure of fingers conforming to its roundness, but by the flat, broad plane of the knuckles. The fingers themselves seemed arrayed, almost spread out, in a way that offered broad rather than intimate support. This was the pivotal detail. This was the moment the ordinary perception irrevocably shifted. It wasn't just a matter of awkwardness or stiffness, it was a profound, almost grotesque defiance of natural human interaction. A living hand, especially a mother's, instinctively shapes itself around the contours of a child's head, offering warmth, security, and tactile connection. This hand did none of those things. It held, yes, but it did not embrace in the biological sense of the word. It was a support, a prop, a frame, but devoid of the organic flexibility inherent in a human touch. The revelation of this unnaturalness was like a sudden, cold gust of wind sweeping through a seemingly warm, sunlit room. It was not just an aesthetic deviation, it was an anatomical impossibility for a truly living, breathing interaction, yet rendered with such subtle precision that it had evaded detection for decades. This specific detail, the rigid, unyielding configuration of the mother's left hand, defied common sense and human anatomy in a way that no mere artistic license could explain. It was too precise in its unnaturalness. It suggested that what was being held was not a responsive, living organism, but something static, something that offered no resistance, no weight, no warmth of its own. The fingers were positioned not to grasp or caress, but to maintain a fixed distance, to present rather than to comfort. The disturbing implication rippled outward from this single observation, enveloping the entire portrait in a new, chilling light. If the mother's hand was not truly embracing her son, but merely holding him in an almost architectural manner, what did that say about the nature of their interaction? It suggested an absence of natural maternal instinct in that specific gesture. It implied a performance, a staging, perhaps even a necessity. The hand's posture was not one of protective instinct but of deliberate placement, like arranging an object. The thought was disquieting. Was the child a passive participant not just in the painting, but in the scene it depicted? Was he an extension of the mother, an accessory, or something even more profoundly detached? The immediate, visceral conclusion born from this critical observation was that the child, despite appearances, was not being held in the living, breathing embrace of a mother. This discovery reframed the entire viewing experience of the portrait, changing it from a quaint historical piece to something deeply unsettling. The benign smile on the mother's face, once interpreted as gentle affection, now seemed to mask a profound disconnect. The child's placid expression, formerly seen as innocent slumber or quiet contemplation, now appeared vacant, unnervingly still. Every element of the composition, previously understood as a harmonious depiction of maternal love, became infused with an underlying tension. The formal stiffness that had been noted earlier suddenly made chilling sense. It wasn't just artistic style, but a reflection of the reality being portrayed. The portrait was no longer a simple window into the past. It was a veiled message, a coded sorrow hidden in plain sight for 120 years. The beautiful facade had crumbled, revealing a truth that was both poignant and profoundly disturbing, a silent scream etched into the canvas. The true nature of the mother's hold, once identified, sent a shiver down the spine of every art historian who examined the portrait. It wasn't a living embrace, it was a pose. Specifically, the mother was holding her son not by cradling him against her body, but by pressing his stiffened form against her hands gripping his back and legs in a manner that suggested not support for a living child, but rather the careful positioning of an object. Her left arm, for instance, instead of gently curving around his back, ran rigidly down his spine. Her hands splayed flat beneath his lower back, almost like a prop. Her right arm, rather than wrapping around his chest or shoulder, was bent at an unnatural angle, her hand disappearing behind his head, seemingly to prevent it from tilting backward. The child's body, far from resting naturally, was propped upright, his limbs unnaturally straight, his head held at a slight, almost forced angle. There was no relaxed muscle tone, no pliancy in his tiny frame. He was not being held, he was being displayed, meticulously arranged to appear alive and engaged, but the mechanics of the grip betrayed the stark, heartbreaking truth. The realization hit like a cold wave. The mother was not holding a squirming, breathing infant, but a child who could no longer move on his own. His stillness was not the calm of a sleeping baby, but the permanent stillness of death. Her arms were not comforting, but supporting. They were a framework meticulously constructed to maintain the illusion of life, to present her son as he once was, or as she desperately wished him to be. This was the specific, visceral detail that shattered the portrait's ordinary facade. It wasn't just an awkward embrace or a stylistic choice. It was a desperate act of preservation captured forever in oil. The how of the embrace was now agonizingly clear. It was the way one would hold a doll or a precious, fragile item that could no longer stand on its own. The meticulousness, the rigidity, the almost clinical precision of her hands all spoke to a profound absence of natural, spontaneous interaction. With this grim understanding, the why began to emerge, shrouded in the heavy veil of 19th century mourning practices. Photography, still a relatively new art form but gaining widespread popularity, had given rise to a somber trend: post-mortem photography. In an era of high infant mortality and limited medical understanding, parents often lost children at incredibly young ages. For many, a post-mortem photograph, or in rarer cases a painting, was the only lasting image they would ever possess of their beloved child. These images served as a final, poignant farewell, a tangible memory to clutch onto in the face of unimaginable grief. The specific unnaturalness of the mother's pose in this 1902 portrait, therefore, pointed squarely towards this tragic possibility. She wasn't holding a living child. She was holding her deceased son, staging a final public moment of connection before his eternal rest. Research into the historical context of the family or artist, though challenging given the passage of time, began to yield fragments of sorrowful information that corroborated this devastating interpretation. While the identity of the specific family remains somewhat guarded to protect their privacy even retrospectively, records of local parishes and historical archives from the early 20th century in the region where the painting originated revealed a heartbreaking pattern of infant deaths within many families. Artists of the period were frequently commissioned for such portraits, often tasked with making the deceased appear as if they were merely sleeping or peacefully at rest. This particular artist, it was discovered, had a few other, less-known works that exhibited similar stylistic choices when depicting children, though none quite as starkly poignant as this one. The subtle historical whispers suggested a common human tragedy playing out in front of the artist's easel. The emotional impact of this discovery was profound and immediate. For viewers, especially those with children or who had experienced loss, the initial shock quickly transformed into a deep, aching sadness. The meticulously painted details, once merely peculiar, now resonated with a suffocating weight of grief. The mother's expression, previously interpreted as stoic or simply typical of the era, now revealed itself as a mask of unimaginable sorrow, a desperate attempt to maintain composure while cradling unspeakable heartbreak. The child's eyes, seemingly open but devoid of true life, became haunting in their emptiness. The perfect little bow on his meticulously arranged clothing, the pristine porcelain quality of his skin, all ceased to be charming details and instead became stark reminders of the efforts taken to present perfection in the face of devastation. The portrait was no longer just a painting. It was a testament to enduring maternal love, a silent scream of loss frozen in time, an intimate glimpse into a profound moment of human vulnerability and sorrow. The ordinary perception had not just shifted, it had evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of empathy and a chilling understanding of the raw, unvarnished pain that art can sometimes so subtly yet so powerfully convey. The profound meaning nestled within this strange embrace finally revealed itself not as a testament to maternal affection, but as a poignant, almost heartbreaking commentary on loss and memory. Art historians, upon closer, more informed analysis, eventually articulated a theory that resonated with chilling clarity. The mother was not truly holding her son. She was cradling a simulacrum, a carefully arranged doll, or even a taxidermied figure, crafted to resemble a child who was no longer living. This devastating realization transformed the entire narrative of the painting, shifting it from a domestic scene to a powerful, albeit morbid tableau mourning the unreachable. The rigid hands, the stiff posture of the child, the lack of natural give and take in the embrace, all these previously unsettling details coalesced into a harrowing depiction of a mother's desperate attempt to preserve the presence of a beloved child snatched away too soon. The symbolism embedded within such a depiction is incredibly rich and deeply sorrowful. It speaks volumes about the human response to grief in an era when infant and child mortality rates were tragically high, and photography, while present, was not yet the widespread instant medium it is today. A portrait then became a vital means of immortalizing the image of a lost loved one. But this specific portrait pushed the boundaries of memorialization, suggesting a profound unwillingness to let go, a yearning so intense it manifested in the tangible creation of a proxy. The mother, through this artistic act, was not just remembering her son, she was, in a symbolic sense, still interacting with him, holding him, presenting him to the world as if he were still alive. It's an allegory for the enduring nature of parental love, even in the face of insurmountable loss, but also for the psychological toll that such loss could exact, leading to powerful, almost ritualistic forms of remembrance. This narrative of loss or detachment, subtle yet overwhelming, became the central interpretative lens through which the painting was finally understood. The absence of genuine interaction between mother and child, once a source of perplexity, became the most powerful statement of presence, the presence of absence itself. The mother's gaze, previously interpreted as merely solemn, now conveyed an almost unbearable weight of sorrow, eyes perhaps seeing past the physical replica to the vibrant child who once was. The child's slightly vacant expression, which had contributed so much to the initial unease, now seemed to perfectly capture the stillness of death, a poignant contrast to the natural animation expected in a living child. The painting therefore served as a sophisticated visual metaphor for the lingering phantom limb of grief, a mother's heart forever reaching for what is no longer there. Expert analysis from psychologists specializing in grief and bereavement further illuminated the portrait's profound depth. They pointed to the psychological mechanisms at play, such as continuing bonds, the idea that individuals maintain connections with deceased loved ones often through symbolic objects or rituals. This portrait, they argued, could be seen as an elaborate artistic manifestation of such a bond, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to bridge the chasm of death, if only for a moment within the confines of the canvas. Art historians highlighted the historical context of postmortem photography, which was common in the 19th and early 20th centuries, where deceased individuals, particularly children, were posed to appear alive. This portrait, in their view, was an extension of that cultural practice, albeit one rendered with paint and brush rather than lens and silver halide, and perhaps even more chillingly, involving a stand-in rather than the deceased individual themselves. The confluence of these expert interpretations painted a picture far more complex and emotionally charged than any initial viewing could suggest. The mother's embrace was no longer merely strange. It was a deeply personal, almost desperate act of love and sorrow, frozen in time. The painting wasn't just a representation of a mother and child, it was a memorial, a testament to an unbearable grief, and a window into the peculiar ways humans have historically coped with the ultimate separation. This insight transformed the portrait from a curious anomaly into a profoundly moving and somewhat disturbing artifact, a silent scream of a mother's heart echoing across more than a century. The quiet dignity of the composition, once perceived as merely formal, now took on a stoic, almost tragic quality, reflecting the societal expectations of restrained grief alongside the undeniable, overwhelming pain. It became a powerful reminder that art, even when seemingly innocuous, can carry layers of meaning that only reveal themselves through careful, empathetic decryption, often telling stories far more profound than the surface suggests. The unsettling detail of the embrace was, in fact, the key to unlocking its sorrowful yet deeply human truth. Even after the profound revelation about the mother's embrace and its deeply sorrowful meaning, the portrait continued to hold an enduring mystery, aspects that kept viewers and scholars alike intrigued and perplexed. The how had been uncovered, the why largely understood through historical and psychological lenses, yet the sheer audacity of the depiction, the almost theatrical staging of grief, still prompted numerous questions. What prompted the artist to agree to such a macabre request? Was this an idea born solely of the grieving mother's despair? Or did the painter contribute to the concept, perhaps drawing inspiration from similar, though less elaborate, memorial practices of the era? The identity of the child model, the one who stood in for the deceased son, remained elusive, adding another layer of quiet speculation. Was it a younger sibling, a cousin, a child from the community? And what was their experience standing in solemn silence being held in an embrace meant for another, a ghost? These lingering uncertainties fueled ongoing discussions, ensuring the portrait remained a constant subject of fascination. The portrait's legacy, therefore, transcended its initial purpose as a private memorial and its later rediscovery as an art historical oddity. The revelation of its true nature fundamentally transformed its reception and place within the canon of early 20th century art. It ceased to be merely a formal portrait from 1902 and instead became a poignant artifact, a powerful testament to the overwhelming human capacity for grief and the inventive, sometimes unsettling ways people have sought to cope with it. Art critics, once dismissive of its slightly unusual composition, now re-evaluated it as a masterpiece of emotional subtlety and historical significance. Educational institutions began incorporating it into curricula, using it to illustrate not just art techniques but also social history, the psychology of bereavement, and the evolution of memorial practices. It became a touchstone for discussions on the fine line between artistic representation and grim reality, challenging comfortable perceptions of period portraiture. Its story served as a stark reminder that what appears ordinary on the surface can conceal depths of human experience almost unimaginable. This particular portrait serves as a powerful illustration of how seemingly minor or easily overlooked details can carry immense, even profound meaning. The subtlety of the mother's hold, the slight stiffness of the child's posture, these were not random artistic quirks or anatomical inaccuracies, but deliberate elements imbued with a devastating narrative. It taught observers a crucial lesson: to look beyond the immediate aesthetic, to question the naturalness of every brushstroke, every shadow, every pose. It underscored the idea that art is rarely truly accidental. Even apparent imperfections can be intentional, loaded with symbolic or narrative weight that demands empathetic interpretation. The portrait demonstrated that the greatest stories, the most heart-wrenching truths, are often encoded in the most unassuming of details, waiting for a discerning eye and an open heart to decipher them. It emphasized the value of slow looking, of patient observation, and of interdisciplinary inquiry, drawing on history, psychology, and anthropology to truly unlock the full narrative potential of historical artifacts. Ultimately, the portrait transcended its initial identity to become a powerful conversation starter, igniting discussions on a multitude of complex themes. It prompted debates about the ethics of memorializing the dead, especially children, in such a visually ambiguous way. It sparked conversations about the historical context of death and mourning, reminding people of a time when death was a more visible and integrated part of life, and when grief was expressed through rituals and customs that might seem strange to modern sensibilities. Furthermore, it encouraged broader discussions on art interpretation itself. How does one approach a piece of art that elicits such strong, often conflicting emotional responses? How do personal biases and contemporary understandings influence the reading of historical works? The painting became a focal point for understanding the interplay between individual trauma and collective cultural practices, between personal sorrow and shared human experience. It was a silent witness, yet its story resonated loudly, forcing those who encountered it to confront uncomfortable truths about loss, love, and the complex ways we seek to immortalize those we have cherished and lost. The quiet elegance of its composition, now understood in its tragic context, amplified its impact, ensuring its place as more than just a painting, but a poignant lesson in empathy and historical understanding. The journey from an initial fleeting glance at a seemingly ordinary 1902 portrait to the profound, unsettling truth of its hidden narrative has been one of gradual, often uncomfortable revelation. We began with an image that presented itself as a typical period piece, a mother lovingly embracing her son, an emblem of domestic tranquility from a bygone era. Yet, Beneath that veneer of normalcy, an almost imperceptible distortion whispered of something amiss. Our collective gaze, sharpened by curiosity and skepticism, moved beyond the superficial, dissecting the subtle incongruities, the unnatural stiffness, the lack of genuine connection that gnawed at our instinctual understanding of a mother's embrace. The initial theories, artistic license, anatomical error, proved insufficient to quiet the growing unease. We scrutinized the mother's hands, the child's posture, comparing them to countless other depictions of maternal affection, each comparison deepening the mystery and validating the suspicion that this was no mere artistic quirk. The turning point arrived with the critical observation, the shocking realization that the mother was not truly holding her son, but rather a carefully propped, lifeless substitute. This discovery irrevocably shattered the illusion, transforming a quaint historical image into a deeply unsettling tableau. The mechanics of the deception, the hidden supports, the arranged limbs, the almost eerie stillness, unveiled the how of this macabre staging. And then came the why, the heartbreaking deduction, supported by historical context and expert analysis, that this was a post-mortem portrait, an elaborate performance of grief designed to preserve the memory of a lost child, using another living child as a stand-in, a chilling proxy for what had been taken too soon. The emotional impact was visceral. The portrait, once a source of mild curiosity, became a poignant testament to the unbearable weight of sorrow, a silent scream frozen in time. The profound meaning behind this strange embrace transcended mere historical oddity. It became a powerful symbol of humanity's enduring struggle with loss and the complex, often unconventional ways we attempt to maintain connections with those who have departed. Art historians and psychologists illuminated the symbolic depth, drawing parallels to post-mortem photography and the psychological need for continuing bonds. The portrait's narrative shifted from one of simple family remembrance to a poignant allegory of grief, detachment, and the desperate yearning for what once was. The mother's seemingly loving embrace was, in fact, a deeply personal and almost desperate act of love and sorrow, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to bridge the chasm of death, if only for a moment, within the confines of the canvas. It reflected not just the family's personal tragedy, but also the broader societal expectations of restrained grief, juxtaposed with the raw, overwhelming pain of parental loss. Even with the truth unveiled, the portrait continues to hold an enduring, enigmatic quality. The questions that linger are no longer about the physical mechanics, but about the emotional landscape of those involved. What was it like for the surviving child posed as a ghost? What depths of despair compelled such a theatrical memorial? The portrait's legacy is profound. It has become a powerful case study in art interpretation, challenging viewers to look beyond the obvious, to question surface appearances, and to delve into the deeper layers of human experience encoded within artistic expression. It stands as a testament to how seemingly minor details can carry immense meaning, completely altering our understanding of a piece of art and the historical narratives it embodies. This painting has sparked crucial conversations about the ethics of remembrance, the psychology of grief, and the boundless capacity of art to communicate untold stories, however unsettling or heartbreaking. Ultimately, the journey through this 1902 portrait stands as a potent reminder that the most compelling tales are often not those immediately visible, but those meticulously woven into the fabric of human creation, waiting to be deciphered. From the initial impression of domestic bliss to the gut-wrenching realization of profound loss, this painting has taken us on an emotional odyssey, compelling us to confront the uncomfortable truths that art can reveal. It forces us to acknowledge the complexity of human emotion, the subtlety of artistic expression, and the enduring power of art to echo across generations, telling stories that might otherwise be forgotten. This portrait, with its haunting embrace, encourages us to scrutinize the world around us with a more discerning eye, to seek out the hidden narratives, and to understand that appearances can indeed be deceiving, with deeper truths often lying just beneath the surface. It is a powerful example of how a single image can transcend time, prompting us to reflect on life, death, and the extraordinary ways we cope with both. So, as you continue your own journey through art and history, remember to look closer, question more deeply, and embrace the richness of the stories waiting to be discovered. If this exploration of hidden meanings and unexpected revelations has captivated your imagination, be sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with fellow enthusiasts of historical mysteries. Join us next time as we uncover another fascinating secret from the annals of time, promising even more intrigue and astonishing discoveries that will undoubtedly leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.